In the space of a heartbeat, the valley floor opened, swallowing men and earth alike. We had walked. They told us the valley was secure. They said the enemy had been pushed back, that the ridges above were empty, that our orders were routine: move through, scout the terrain, and establish a temporary position near the riverbed. It sounded simple, almost too simple, and that should have been my first warning. My name is Captain Jonathan Mercer, United States Army, 1944. We were in Italy, part of the long grind northward through mud, mountains, and misery. My platoon was young, green, eager to prove themselves. Some were barely old enough to shave, others hardened by earlier battles, all carrying the same mix of fear and pride that came with the uniform. I was 28 years old, already feeling like an old man compared to their fresh faces. I had seen enough combat to know one truth: the moments of quiet, the times when the orders sounded routine, those were the moments that usually went bad. The war had a cruel sense of humor. It liked to punish confidence. We set out at dawn, the sky painted in gray streaks of cloud, the cold biting through our jackets. The valley stretched ahead, wide and deceptively peaceful, the kind of place that could have been a painting if you ignored the distant boom of artillery. Fields scarred by shell fire, farmhouses half collapsed, trees with their tops torn away by shrapnel. The land itself bore the wounds of war. My men moved in staggered formation. Corporal James Fletcher, the joker of the group, carried the Browning automatic rifle slung across his chest. Private Lewis Hart, only 19, clutched his M1 as though it might slip away from him at any second. Sergeant Daniels, my second, walked beside me, steady and silent, his jaw tight. He was the kind of soldier every officer prayed for: reliable, unshakable. If Daniels had doubts, he never voiced them. As we crossed the valley floor, I remember thinking how odd it was to hear birds. Actual birds singing in the hedgerows. For weeks, the soundtrack of our lives had been nothing but gunfire, mortars, and shouted orders. That morning, for a brief span of time, the war seemed to hold its breath. And then, the ground betrayed us. It started with a sound, not an explosion, not gunfire. A hollow crack, deep and resonant, like the earth itself was splitting. I froze, my boots suspended mid-step as the ground beneath me gave way. In the space of a heartbeat, the valley floor opened, swallowing men and earth alike. We had walked into a hidden cavern, an old system of tunnels and sinkholes weakened by artillery. The earth had been waiting, ready to collapse, and collapse it did. I remember the look on Private Hart's face as the ground vanished under him. His rifle tumbled from his hands, his mouth open in a silent scream, and then he was gone, falling into darkness. Fletcher tried to grab him, but the edge crumbled, taking Fletcher with him. The world turned into chaos. Dirt and stone rained down, the roar of the collapse drowning out shouts and screams. I lunged for a tree root jutting from the earth and barely caught it, the ground around me disintegrating. Men fell, weapons clattered, voices cried out from the depths below. When the dust cleared, half my platoon was gone, buried alive, swallowed by the valley. I hung there, clinging to the root, coughing dirt from my lungs, staring down into the jagged maw below. I could hear voices, faint, desperate, echoing from the dark. Men calling for help, men crying out in pain. That was the moment I realized. Our mission hadn't just changed. It had become something entirely different. We weren't soldiers advancing on the enemy anymore. We were survivors, trapped in a world beneath the world, with no map, no orders, and no guarantee we'd ever see daylight again. And it all began when the ground opened beneath our feet. The first instinct was to panic. Men screamed from below, their voices muffled by dirt and stone. Others clung to the crumbling edges, boots slipping as the ground gave way piece by piece. Sergeant Daniels barked orders through the chaos, his voice sharp, trying to hold the platoon together. "Secure the edge! Get ropes down there now!" But we had no ropes, no ladders. We weren't prepared to fight the earth itself. I pulled myself onto firmer ground, heart hammering, hands raw from gripping that tree root. I looked around. Half the men who had been walking just seconds ago were gone. Private Hart, Fletcher, Martinez, Riley, all swallowed by the collapse. The rest of us lay scattered, gasping in the dirt, staring into the jagged maw of earth that had opened beneath our boots. I crawled to the edge and peered down. At first, all I could see was swirling dust. Then, slowly, Shadows took shape. The sinkhole had opened into what looked like a massive cavern, a black chamber carved by time and water, its walls slick with moisture. Far below, maybe 30 feet, I saw movement. Men lying on rubble, some still, some trying to climb, others waving frantically. Their voices reached us in desperate fragments. "Help us! My leg! God, it's broken! Captain, don't leave us!" The sound of their terror was worse than any gunfire. Gunfire was simple, clean. You pointed your weapon, you pulled the trigger, you survived or you didn't. This was something else. This was watching the earth itself turn traitor. "Daniels," I said, my voice tight, "we've got to get down there." He shook his head. "Sir, if we climb down blind, we'll lose more men. The walls are unstable. We need a plan." But we didn't have time for a plan. A rumble shivered through the ground, sending more dirt cascading into the cavern. If the rest of it gave way, the men below would be buried alive. I made a choice. Not the smartest, maybe not even the right one, but a choice. "Grab anything you can use as rope," I ordered. "Belts, straps, webbing. We're going down." We lashed our gear together, belts, rifle slings, even a length of field wire we'd carried for communications. It wasn't long enough, not nearly, but it gave us a start. Daniels lowered himself first, boots skidding against the slick wall until he dropped the final feet into the rubble below. His shout came up, ragged but steady. "Send the next man!" One by one we went down, our improvised rope groaning under the strain. My palms burned as I slid, every muscle tense, waiting for the whole wall to give way again. When my boots finally hit bottom, the air down there was thick, damp, and foul, like the breath of something ancient. The light from above barely reached us. Shadows clung to every corner. The scene was worse up close. Private Hart lay on his back, his face pale, one leg bent at an impossible angle. Fletcher was coughing blood, a jagged piece of rebar protruding from his side. Martinez's helmet was gone, his head bleeding from a nasty gash. Only Riley was still on his feet, helping the others, his face streaked with dirt and terror. "Captain," he gasped when he saw me. "I thought we were done for." I put a hand on his shoulder. "Not while I'm still breathing, Private. We're getting out of here." But even as I said it, I looked around and realized the truth. There was no easy way out. The cavern stretched deeper into the earth, a maze of black tunnels vanishing into shadow. The walls above were unstable, ready to collapse again. And worst of all, faint sounds echoed from those tunnels, sounds that didn't belong to the earth shifting. Boots, movement, voices. We hadn't fallen into an empty cavern, we had fallen into their world, and the enemy was already waiting. The moment I heard the voices, every instinct in me went cold. It wasn't the echo of my own men, it was low, hushed, deliberate. The cadence was unmistakable. German. We had fallen into a cavern that wasn't empty, it was occupied. Daniels crouched beside me, his face grim under the faint light. "Sir," he whispered, "we're not alone down here." "No," I muttered. "We're not." The shadows shifted deeper in the tunnel. A faint glint of metal, the clink of a rifle butt against stone. They knew we were here. They'd probably known the moment the earth gave way. I turned back to my men. Fletcher was pale, still coughing blood. Hart lay moaning, his leg bent at a cruel angle. Martinez's head wound was bleeding sluggishly. Doc was already working, hands steady despite the gloom, whispering words of comfort none of us quite believed. We couldn't fight like this. Half our platoon was injured. The other half were shaken and caked in dust. Their nerves stretched to breaking. But we couldn't stay still either. If the Germans were here, if they were using these caverns as storage, or worse, as an ambush route, we were sitting ducks. Daniels leaned in. "Orders, Captain?" I hesitated, not because I didn't know what to do, but because there were no good choices. Every path forward carried a price. Finally, I said, "No, form a perimeter, rifles ready. Doc, do what you can. Riley, take 2 men and cover that tunnel. If they come through, don't wait for permission. Open fire." Riley swallowed hard but nodded, leading 2 privates into position. Their silhouettes looked small against the yawning black. That was when I made a mistake. A small one, maybe. But in war, small mistakes multiply fast. I told the men, "We hold until we can climb out. Reinforcements will come if they hear the collapse." It was a lie, and I knew it. No one was coming. Not here, not to this broken valley. Command thought the ground above was secure. They wouldn't send help until it was far too late. As if to prove me right, the first shot cracked through the cavern, a sharp, angry flash from the dark tunnel. The bullet smacked into the rock inches above Riley's head, showering him in dust. He fired back, the tunnel erupting in thunder as the others joined him. Muzzle flashes stuttered in the gloom, lighting faces twisted with fear and resolve. "Contact!" Riley screamed. The cavern became chaos. The wounded cried out as dirt and stone rained down again. My men fired into the dark, their rifles echoing like cannons. Underground, the Germans shouted, their words bouncing off the stone walls, disorienting, surrounding us. I dropped behind a slab of rock, returning fire, my ears ringing in the confined space. "Daniels!" I shouted. "We can't stay here, we'll be overrun!" He nodded grimly. "Then we go deeper, sir. Better to fight where they don't expect us." It was insane. Deeper meant darker, unknown territory, no guarantee of a way out. But staying meant death, and I had to make a choice. "Fall back!" I yelled. "Into the tunnels! Move! Move!" The men obeyed, dragging the wounded, firing in bursts to keep the enemy back. Fletcher groaned as two soldiers hauled him, blood soaking his uniform. Hart's cries were muffled as Doc strapped a makeshift splint to his shattered leg. We staggered deeper, the cavern swallowing us, the gunfire chasing like a storm. The further we went, the tighter the walls became, until we were in a narrow passage barely wide enough for two men shoulder to shoulder. The light from above faded completely. The only illumination came from the stuttering flashes of rifles behind us. When the gunfire finally ceased, replaced by echoes and silence, I realized the truth. We weren't soldiers on a mission anymore. We were ghosts wandering a labyrinth, and somewhere in the dark, the enemy still followed. The deeper we pushed, the more the cavern closed around us. The air grew colder, damper, filled with the smell of stone and something older. Mildew, rot, the stink of earth that hadn't seen the sun in centuries. Our boots scraped against uneven rock, every sound magnified by the echoing passageways. I could feel the fear in my men. It clung to them the way the humidity clung to our skin. They whispered prayers, checked their weapons with trembling hands, cast glances over their shoulders into the black. Daniels walked just ahead of me, steady as ever, his rifle low, his eyes sharp. He didn't speak, but his presence was an anchor. If Daniels was calm, the others could pretend to be. Behind us, Riley half-carried Fletcher, whose lips were turning blue. Doc kept close to Hart, whispering encouragement as he dragged himself forward on a splinted leg. Every step was agony, but the boy never complained. We were ghosts now, stumbling through the guts of the earth, praying the walls wouldn't cave in and bury us alive. At the first junction, the tunnel split in 3 directions, left, right, and straight ahead. All looked the same, narrow black throats swallowing the light. I stopped, raised a hand. "Quiet." The men froze. I listened. At first, nothing but our own ragged breaths. Then, there it was. Faint, a scrape, a voice, German again, to the right. I pointed left. "This way." Daniels gave me a sharp look. He knew what I was doing. Avoiding contact. Buying time. We couldn't fight in these tunnels, not with wounded and no knowledge of the terrain. If we engaged, we'd be slaughtered. The men obeyed without question, filing into the left passage. It sloped downward, the floor slick with moisture. Our boots slid on algae-slick stone, and twice men went down hard, rifles clattering. Each noise echoed like thunder, and I cursed under my breath. Half an hour passed, maybe more. Time lost meaning in the dark. The only measure was the burn in our legs and the rasp of our lungs. Then we came to a vast chamber. The ceiling arched high above, lost in shadow. Stalactites hung like teeth, water dripping steadily from their tips. The floor was uneven, scattered with boulders and rubble. For the first time since the collapse, there was space to breathe. "Hold here," I said. We lowered the wounded against a rock wall. Doc went to work again, cutting strips of fabric for bandages. Fletcher coughed weakly, blood staining his lips. Hart drifted in and out of consciousness, his face pale as parchment. The others huddled close, rifles pointed at the dark passages leading out of the chamber. Every one of us knew we weren't safe. We were cornered animals waiting for the hunter to strike. That was when I spoke, not just to give orders, but to remind them of who we were. "Listen to me," I said, raising my voice so it carried across the chamber. "We're not done. Not here. You hear me? We're soldiers of the United States Army. We've faced worse than shadows in a cave. We will find a way out. And every one of you is coming with me. Every single one. They looked at me, eyes wide, desperate to believe, and for a moment they did. If you're hearing this and you believe in keeping stories like ours alive, hit subscribe. It's the only way these memories won't be lost in the dark. It was a small thing, a spark in the dark. And right then, sparks were all we had. Daniels leaned close, voice low. Sir, you know they're coming. We can't sit here. He was right. Even as he spoke, I heard it again, the echo of boots on stone growing louder, closer. The Germans were hunting us, and the only question now was, would we find a way out before they found us? The sound of boots grew sharper, echoing like drums in the cavern. My men tightened their grips on their rifles, eyes darting to the black tunnels that surrounded us. The Germans weren't rushing. They were careful, methodical. They knew we were trapped, and they were going to close in slow like wolves circling prey. Daniels, I said, voice low. Take Riley and Chen. Find us another exit. Anything. A crack in the wall, a draft of air, I don't care. We need a way out. He nodded, signaling the others, and they slipped into one of the side tunnels. The rest of us prepared for the inevitable. I crouched beside Hart, who was drifting in and out, his forehead clammy with sweat. Doc looked up at me, eyes shadowed. He won't last much longer, Captain. We need daylight, fresh air. I know, I muttered, but daylight felt like a dream. A sudden clang echoed from the tunnel behind us, metal on stone. The enemy was testing our nerves. A second later, a flare arced into the chamber, its harsh red glow spilling across the walls. Shadows danced wildly, stretching like demons. The Germans had flushed us into the light. Positions, I shouted. Muzzle flashes tore the darkness apart. Bullets sparked against stone, ricochets whining like angry hornets. My men fired back, the cavern filling with thunder. Dust rained from above with every shot, choking us, blinding us. Through the chaos, I saw Riley and Daniels sprint back into the chamber, Chen on their heels. Sir, Daniels shouted over the gunfire. We found a shaft, narrow, steep, but it leads up. That was hope, raw and fragile. But hope was enough. Cover fire, I yelled. Get the wounded moving now. We laid down a storm of bullets, driving the Germans back into the tunnels. The air reeked of cordite, ears ringing from the deafening blasts. Under cover of fire, Daniels and Riley half-dragged Hart toward the narrow shaft Chen had found. Fletcher was carried by two men, groaning with each step, his blood soaking into their sleeves. The shaft was worse than I'd imagined, little more than a jagged crack twisting upward into blackness. But it was all we had. One by one, the men climbed, boots slipping on the wet stone, hands scraping raw against the rock. Every grunt, every clink of metal echoed like a beacon to the enemy. Behind us, the Germans regrouped. Their shouts grew louder, closer. Grenades clattered against stone, one detonating with a skull-shattering roar that sent shards flying. A man screamed, clutching his arm, as shrapnel tore through flesh. Move, I roared. Don't look back, climb! I pushed Hart upward, his broken leg dragging uselessly. Doc climbed behind him, bracing him with one arm while gripping the rock with the other. Riley scrambled after them, slipping, cursing, blood running down his cheek from a graze. I stayed at the base with Daniels, laying down the last line of fire. Our rifles barked until the barrels glowed. Germans filled the mouth of the chamber, their helmets glinting red in the dying flare. For a heartbeat, I locked eyes with one of them across the chaos. A boy, no older than Riley, his face pale, rifle trembling in his hands. He fired. The bullet smacked the stone by my head, showering me in dust. Daniels, I shouted, up! That's an order! He hesitated, teeth clenched, then obeyed, clambering into the shaft. I followed last, my boots slipping on slick rock, lungs burning as I dragged myself upward. Bullets snapped past, some striking sparks from the stone inches from my hands. A grenade rolled into the base of the shaft, and I threw myself upward with everything I had. The blast roared beneath me, the shockwaves slamming into my back, propelling me higher. My ears rang, my vision blurred, but I kept climbing, because stopping meant the ground would swallow us forever. The shaft twisted like a serpent, every inch a battle. My hands slipped on wet stone, nails tearing, skin raw. Above me, Daniels hauled himself higher with grim determination, his breath ragged in the narrow space. Below us, the cavern echoed with German shouts. They hadn't given up. They were climbing after us. A shot cracked upward, the bullet sparking against the wall beside my boot. Another followed, whining past my shoulder. I pressed flat against the rock, heart hammering, before dragging myself upward again. Every muscle screamed, lungs clawing for air, thick with dust and smoke. "Faster!" I barked, though the order was as much for myself as anyone else. Daniels grunted in reply, pushing onward. Above him, Riley's boots scraped, sending dirt raining down into my face. Doc's voice echoed faintly higher still, urging Hart to keep moving, though the boy groaned in pain with every pull. We were a desperate chain of bodies clawing toward salvation. A grenade clinked against stone below. I froze. There was no room to dodge. The blast thundered, the shockwave surging through the shaft like a fist. The force slammed me into the wall, knocking the air from my chest. Dirt and stone rained down. I felt the shaft tremble, a groan of earth that promised another collapse. But it held. By some miracle it held. I dragged myself upward again, coughing, half-blind, ears ringing. Behind me, silence. I didn't know if the Germans had been buried by their own grenade or were simply waiting for us to slow. Either way, I wasn't about to stop. Minutes, or maybe an eternity. Later, Daniels gave a hoarse shout. "Light! I see light!" Hope surged through me, bitter and bright. We clawed faster, scraping knees, tearing hands, ignoring the pain. The shaft widened near the top, opening into a jagged tear in the earth. A faint silvery glow spilled down. Moonlight. Cold. Pure. Beautiful. Riley was first out, scrambling onto the surface with a desperate gasp. He turned, reaching down to pull Hart through with Doc's help. Daniels followed, collapsing on the edge, chest heaving. I pushed the last few feet, my body screaming, until my hands grasped cool grass and I pulled myself free. The night air hit me like a baptism, cold, clean, sharp in my lungs. After hours in the stinking dark, it felt like heaven itself. But there was no time to rest. We were out, but not safe. The forest stretched around us, skeletal trees etched in silver by the moon. The wind whispered through the branches, carrying the faint sound of pursuit. I crouched low, scanning. We were still deep in enemy territory. Behind us, the cavern mouth yawned black, and I knew the Germans weren't far behind. Daniels crawled up beside me. His face was streaked with dirt and blood, but his eyes were steady. "Orders, sir?" I looked at my men. Hart lay pale and trembling, cradled by Doc. Fletcher was barely conscious, his blood seeping through fresh bandages. Riley and Chen crouched with rifles ready, their hands shaking but their eyes fierce. They were alive, but only just. The truth pressed heavy on me. We couldn't run fast, not with the wounded. If the Germans poured out of that cavern, we'd be cut down in minutes. "We move," I said finally. "Slow, quiet toward the river. If we can follow it, maybe we'll find our way back to our lines." Daniels nodded. The men gathered themselves, pulling the wounded onto makeshift stretchers of branches and webbing. Every step would be agony. But at least we were under the sky again. I cast one last glance at the cavern mouth. The earth had tried to bury us. The enemy had tried to finish the job. And both had failed, for now. But the night was far from over. The forest at night was a world of whispers. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a branch underfoot felt like a gunshot announcing our presence. We moved in a broken line. The wounded carried on stretchers cobbled together from branches and torn webbing. Each step was agony for them, and each groan tightened the knot in my gut. We followed the river like a lifeline, its silver ribbon glinting faintly under the moon. It was both a guide and a curse. The water would help us navigate, but it also sang loud enough to mask enemy movement. The Germans could stalk us just yards away and we'd never know. Daniels walked beside me, rifle at the ready, his face grim. Riley brought up the rear, every few steps glancing over his shoulder into the black. Doc shuffled in the middle, whispering soft encouragement to Hart and Fletcher, their pale faces glistening with sweat. We didn't speak beyond what was necessary. The night air was too thin, too fragile. Words felt like they could shatter it. Then, faint but unmistakable, came the sound. Boots, crunching softly on leaves. Steady, purposeful. Behind us. I raised my fist. The line froze. My men sank to the ground like shadows, rifles angled back. The wounded were laid down gently, their eyes wide with fear but silent. The boots grew louder, closer. Then, silence. Chen eased forward on his belly, sliding like a snake through the brush. A minute later, he was back, face tight. "Patrol, 4 men, spacing's good, they're tracking us." My jaw clenched. The Germans weren't just chasing, they were hunting, and they were disciplined about it. "Options?" Daniels whispered. I looked at my men, exhausted shadows clinging to life. A firefight would finish us. We needed to buy time. "Ambush," I whispered back. "Quick and quiet, then we move." We melted into the undergrowth, forming a ragged arc around the stretchers. My pulse thudded in my ears as I sighted down my rifle. The Germans appeared like ghosts between the trees, pale faces under steel helmets, rifles ready. They moved slow, deliberate, scanning the ground. The lead man crouched, touched the earth, pointed forward. My stomach dropped. He was reading our trail like an open book. The moment stretched, fragile as glass. Then I squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked the night, dropping the lead German before he could cry out. Daniels fired an instant later, cutting down the second. Chen's knife flashed in the dark, and a third man gurgled silently as he fell. Riley's rifle barked once, and the fourth crumpled. It was over in seconds. 4 bodies lay still, the night rushing back in like a tide. "Move!" I hissed. "Now!" We hoisted the stretchers again, pushing down river faster, our boots squelching in mud. My chest ached with every breath, but the adrenaline kept me upright. Behind us, the forest seemed to wake. Voices shouted in German, whistles cut the night. The rest of their unit knew. The chase was on. We stumbled through the dark, half running, half carrying. Branches tore at our faces, the wounded moaned softly, every jolt a fresh agony. Suddenly the ground opened again, not into a cave this time, but a clearing. The river spread wide, its surface silver under the moon. On the far bank, the trees stood thick and black. Safety was over there, but between us and it was the water. And the voices behind us were closing fast. Daniels crouched at my side, panting. "Sir, they'll be on us before we can get everyone across." I stared at the dark water. Wide, cold, a gamble, but there was no other choice. "We cross," I said. "Now, all of us." The men didn't question. They never did. We waded into the river, the icy water biting instantly at our skin, dragging at the stretchers. The current surged strong, pulling us sideways. Halfway across, I risked a glance back. Figures burst into the clearing, rifles raised, moonlight gleaming off helmets. Muzzle flashes erupted, bullets slapping the water around us. The river had become our battlefield, and if it didn't carry us to safety, it would carry us to our graves. The water clawed at us, each step a battle. The stretchers dipped low, wounded men gasping as icy currents surged over them. My boots slipped on the slick stones beneath, and twice I nearly went under, rifle clutched high above my head. "Keep moving!" I shouted, though my voice was nearly lost under the roar of the river and the crack of rifle fire from the far bank. Bullets zipped around us, little plumes of spray bursting inches from our faces. The Germans were lining the bank we'd just left, firing down into the water. I could hear their shouted orders, see their silhouettes flashing against the moonlight. Riley went under for a moment, his helmet bobbing before I grabbed him by the collar and yanked him up. He spat river water, coughed, and kept trudging forward. Doc was clutching Hart's stretcher, whispering prayers between breaths. Daniels fired back blindly with his Garand, each shot echoing across the water. Halfway. Just halfway. But the current was stronger here, dragging us sideways, pulling us downstream toward jagged rocks that churned the river into froth. "Angle left!" I roared. "Fight it!" We struggled together, every man leaning into the current, forcing ourselves toward the far shore. The wounded moaned, their eyes wide with terror as water lapped over them. Fletcher, delirious with fever, murmured his mother's name over and over. Then the river chose its victim. One of the stretchers slipped. The men holding it lost their grip, and in a flash the wounded Marine was gone, swept screaming into the darkness. His voice carried for a moment, then was silenced by the rushing water. We didn't have time to mourn. We kept moving, each of us fueled by raw survival. The far bank grew closer, trees looming like salvation. My chest burned, my muscles screamed. Then with a final surge, we stumbled onto the muddy shore, collapsing in a heap of exhausted bodies. But the Germans weren't done. Muzzle flashes sparked across the river, rounds tearing into the trees around us. Bark flew, leaves shredded. We scrambled for cover, dragging the wounded with us. Daniels fired until his clip pinged empty, then reloaded with trembling hands. Chen crawled to the edge of the bank, taking careful shots, each one sending a German diving for cover. The river was now our ally. Its roar masked our movements, and its current made crossing difficult. The enemy couldn't rush us without risking the same fate we'd just endured. For the first time all night, we had a sliver of an advantage. We hunkered down in the tree line, panting, shivering. The wounded were laid gently on the ground, their breaths ragged but alive. We had lost one man to the water, but 5 still lived. Daniels crouched beside me, wiping blood from a shallow cut across his cheek. They'll regroup. They'll try to flank us. I know, I said, my voice was flat, hollow. But we've got ground, and we hold it until sunrise. The hours crawled. Sporadic gunfire crackled across the river, tracer rounds arcing through the dark. We fired back when we could, conserving ammunition. Mostly we listened, to the cries of the wounded, to the whispers of the forest, to the river that had both betrayed us and saved us. When dawn finally came, pale and weak through the trees, we saw movement on the opposite bank. German shapes pulled back into the forest, their hunt unfinished. Maybe they didn't want to risk the crossing in daylight. Maybe they thought we were broken enough already. We didn't cheer. We didn't even smile. We just sat there in the mud, too tired to move, too hollow to celebrate. Of the 12 men who had gone into that jungle, 7 now remained. Scarred, broken, alive, for now. That mission never made it into any report worth remembering. Command didn't want to hear about rivers and caves and ambushes gone wrong. They wanted neat numbers, tidy accounts. But for us, it was carved into our bones. We learned that night that survival wasn't about strength or training or even luck. It was about stubbornness. The refusal to stop moving even when the ground itself seemed to conspire against you. And I tell it now, not for glory, but because the memory deserves to live. The men deserve to live. In your ears, in your hearts, even if just for a moment. If you've been with me through this story, thank you. These memories are heavy, but sharing them makes the weight just a little easier to carry. If you want to hear more of the battles we fought, the ones in the jungle, the snow, and in our own minds, make sure to subscribe to this channel. And if this story moved you, leave a comment. Share it. It means more than you know. The river may have tried to bury us, but as long as the story is told, we never really go under.